The way my house is designed is it's a shed style roof. And what that is, the whole roof is just one plane and it's angled very slightly. It's not very steeply angled or very complex. So it's a rather easy roof to execute. The way that I was able to pull that off is I had to, on my base level of framing, I had 8-foot walls on all 4 sides. So I needed to add some height on one side of the house in order to lay the roof joists on top of that framing so they'll run at an angle. So what I did is I built an extension wall to the front side of my house. And this front extension wall also had 4 small windows in it that add a lot of sunlight into the house. The way that my roof was designed, it's a 28-foot long roof and it's actually 10-foot wide. So it's going to have 4-foot overhangs on either side, and it's also going to have a foot overhang on the front and a foot overhang on the back. That way there's adequate rain displacement when there is precipitation. The way that I designed the roof joist is I had 14 roof joists, and those 14 roof joists were attached with 2 14-foot long rim joists on the back and then 2 14-foot long rim joists on the front. For my roof joist, I decided to go with 2x6 lumber, and the reason I chose this dimensions is because usually roofs do need to be strong enough to hold the weight of the sheathing, and say if there is some snow, it is good to have some strength. Generally, it doesn't need to hold that much weight, especially if it's a single-story house. So I use 2x6 lumber to frame out my roof joist. The way that I attach my roof joists to the actual walls of the house is I laid the roof joist down onto the extension wall on one side and then down onto the 8-foot wall on the other side. Once I saw where it laid down on those 2 parts, I was able to make a measurement to cut a notch. That way the roof joist would sit notched into the wall itself, and that way it can be nailed in from there. Notch each piece of roof joist and lay it down onto the walls of the house. And then once laid down and you have a even row of roof joists, you can start nailing them in. I also added hurricane hangers. It's a metal bracket that attaches the roof joist onto the framing of the house just for some extra protection. Texas is known to get some pretty strong winds. The roof sheathing is installed the same way that all the other sheathing is installed. Really, you just want to slide the roof sheathing up through the joist and then lay it down on top of the actual house itself, and then you can nail it in from there. Just be careful when you are climbing on top of the nailed in sheathing. You know, it's being supported by 2x6 lumber, which isn't the strongest wood. The roof sheathing won't be thick enough. Usually exterior sheathing is 3/8 wood, which is not as strong as 1/2-inch wood, which is usually rated for people to walk on. When you're laying your sheathing for the roof joist, you want to make sure that your seams are staggered. So to do this, you want to go down the row opposite. So you want to start the first row with a 1/2 sheet of 4x8 sheathing, which is going to be a 4x4 sheet, and then work that down the row. And then on the row next to it, you can put in a full sheet of sheathing. That way the seams between those 2 rows will never line up and it'll be staggered. The reason you do that is because you want to make sure that you reduce the risk of any types of roof leaks or anything like that. To make one side of the house taller than the other, I had to frame out top vent windows within a extension piece that I put onto the front side of the house. And the framing for that is exactly the same if you are framing out a regular wall. You want to have a top plate and you want to have a bottom plate, and that can nail into the top plate of the wall that you're extending onto. The framing for the windows is exactly the same as when you're framing the windows and doors. Another thing to mention is if you're on top of a roof and you're nailing in roof sheathing, make sure that you're careful on the parts that are overhangs. Obviously, they will be not supported by. When building a roof, the biggest concern people usually has is if it's going to be watertight and it's going to be safe from the weather. In Texas, we have very strong sun, but also we have torrential rain, so I knew that the roof itself needed to be strong enough to withstand that.
So I have 3 layers of protection. The first layer is when you're installing your sheathing. You want to make sure that you're laying your zip tape between the 2 sheets of sheathing. So I have a Huber Zip System sheathing. So I just lay the tape in between the 2 sheets, and that will make it watertight. Also, underneath that, I have closed cell foam that is sprayed on the interior of the house, and that also acts as a watertight barrier in the case of some type of leak. And then thirdly, I have the actual roofing of the house is going to be corrugated metal. If you're overlapping the corrugated metal properly, that's going to be another layer of water protection to make sure that the roof is leak-proof. After you lay all of the sheathing for the house is not going to have any windows or doors cut out. So you're going to have to cut out all of the window and door holes. So during the application of the sheathing, you're most likely going to just lay the sheet of wood over the window covering and then just nail it into the framing. But now that the house is up and standing and the walls are upright, now is the time to use a circular saw to cut out any window holes or door holes, because this will be the next step before you can install any windows and doors in the house. For the full tutorial on how to sheathe a tiny house and complete a roof for a tiny house, go to www.diylifeguide.com for the full tutorial. I'll explain all of it step by step.